Okay, just going to have a quick look at the Brightspace Checklist tool. And this tool has some possibilities, we think, for tasks like study guides, etc. But within Brightspace, it actually is an option for you as a teacher to create a checklist for students to work through as an individual content item. You can't situate it, doesn't look like, within other types of content, but it can be a standalone item. So what I'm looking at here, for example, is a checklist that previously we had in different subject sites as an embedded PDF. So for example, we've got a document here that students could previously print out, a study guide where they could work through things and print it out. And I've put that content directly into Brightspace, into the checklist tool. When you click on it from the nav, I'm in here as a learner, and I open that checklist. What you get is an instructions section at the top. So in this case, I've actually attached the file so they could get the PDF if they wanted it. But then we have the different sections, and they sit underneath, I guess, subheadings, if you will, sections. And then you work through, as the instructions say up here, mark off each element as you go through it. Then you go, yep, done that, done that, done that. Haven't done that. And for example, they're collapsible if you need to. It's quite long, I suppose, in a way. It depends how many items are going into your list, if that's a consideration, the screen, the real estate, etc., how much is being used. Cover some of those. For some of the items, you'll see, apart from just the text of the item itself, there is also the potential for a description to be put in underneath if there's more text than just the item itself. And then the last section, for example, under the assessments that we had, one of the items it mentioned had a particular date already set. And when you create that item, you can also connect that then to the calendar within Brightspace, and then that would also trigger kind of reminders and other things as well. Keeping in mind that if you've created an assessment task with a date, they're already going to get that, so that might be a bit superfluous there. And then this assessment, for example, has stuff in the description underneath against the main text. So we've moved from this object, for example, where we just had everything going in with those checkboxes, where the intent was always going to be print it off, tick it off, etc., pen and paper, have it as your kind of study guide next to you, to the option of a dynamic checklist of sorts that you engage with, and again, potentially print off. But if you're going to be printing that off as a student, you'll also notice that when you check these items off, there's a save option here. If I click that, what that's going to be doing for the student, if we look at, if we go to sort of the student dashboard, what that does, when we go into it, it's telling us that of the study guide, there's a summary in here somewhere that basically says how many of those sections you've actually finished. Right now I'm actually still looking at this as a learner, and it doesn't seem to be showing me that information. But I think if I get out of here and have a look at this, there we go. Checklist. When I'm looking at this still as a learner, you'll see that it's got a progression of sorts, how many you've completed. So it sits on that front page before you open the checklist itself. And that was the PDF, the separate PDF I talked about, where you could actually attach that as well. So you can attach files. I would say that it's a little bit, I don't know about clunky. It doesn't look the greatest just having it like that. Maybe there's a better way to get that in there with an icon or something. But effectively, there's our checklist that we've worked through. We've got progression of sorts. You notice that when we click on that item now, it's opening the checklist in its own separate window. So I'm not really sure why there's a distinction between this time round me clicking on it and it doing this. And again, I could print screen this and print it all out in the one go, versus the first time I did it, where it just continued through. It's a little strange. We'll need to keep doing a little bit more digging into that. But if I jump out of here as the learner and go back into the checklist tool, you can have a look at what it looks like behind the scenes. So as I mentioned, it's just another type of content. So when we add in new pieces of content, for example, the checklist item is here. And what that looks like effectively, apart from giving it a title, description potentially, that's all the stuff we saw on the front page, that description. It then shows you how it's going to look, sort of. The students don't get this side nav as such generally. When we open the checklist, we now get to populate that. So the heading of the checklist, we already have that title, but then we have categories, or those section headings that I had, and the individual items. Here's that option about opening it in a new window. So maybe leave that unchecked if you think that looks a bit horrible. Otherwise, you're going to get that separate box that we looked at. So then you add in each of the items. Now, if I cancel this, go into this existing one as the teacher, you can see each of those sections that's been populated. So the file that we saw underneath, to get that attached in here, I had to actually go to the add stuff, insert stuff option, and then upload the file. I could have done it to a link potentially, just put in a hyperlink, maybe that would have looked a bit nicer. But uploading the file directly from my computer resulted in this line of text in there. So maybe there's going to be a nicer way to add and attach files. There's that box checked to open in a new window, so maybe no thanks. And then we have our categories, individual items. You can reorder those if you want to, and it'll give you the numbers next to it, how they appear underneath each category. So you can change those and reorder them. That's not terrible. And if you wanted to add additional items or categories in there, you could, or edit the existing ones. And some of them where we saw that they had descriptions. So for example, this assessment 3 had a description underneath it. There's the item itself that we see in the list. To get the description, you've got to open it up and then you can see it underneath here. And all of those could have media and other things attached to them, but potentially that's going beyond the remit of what, in this case, this checklist is just meant to be a very peripheral guide for students to refer back to, rather than the more stuff you add in there, I feel like we're crossing over into the territory of the actual learning materials themselves rather than the support document. Anyway, that's a brief look at the checklist tool that you can add within Brightspace.